Good evening. Welcome to the October 14th, 2017 edition of Daily Talk, Researcher 135's community call on www.talkshoe.com with your host, Rich Vernadeau. Welcome to guest 3 in the chat room. Tonight's going to be a big show. We're going to be discussing publishing a book, how to publish a book. All 3 of the guests tonight, Wendy Rose Williams, Linda Beauvais, and I think that's you, Linda, in Montreal. Good evening, Linda.
Hi, good evening. Hi.
Welcome to the show. As I was just saying, we're going to be discussing how you publish a book, how to go about publishing a book. And Wendy Rose Williams will be here with us, Lori Reagan, and, of course, you and all of these guests tonight, including you, Linda Beauvais, are previous guests of mine here on the show, and I want to welcome you back.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Well, tell me a little bit while we're waiting for other panelists to arrive. Tell me about your journey to become a published author. Tell me a little about that.
Well, I've always wanted to write a book, and when something happened to me that I felt was a good story, I decided to write a book, and that's a long time ago. I started about 25 years ago to write the book. And, you know, every step of the way I didn't know how to do things, but for some reason, well, I'd see on the Internet, okay, now you can do this, and now you can do that. It took me a long time to write the book, and then when it was finished, well, I had to find out what can I do? And, there's different avenues that one can go. There's, trying to get a publisher or an agent. And then I saw on the Internet that you could actually publish yourself, do a self-publishing.
And I want to get back to you there. First, I'd like to take a moment, Linda Beauvais, to welcome Wendy Rose Williams from Washington. Hello, Wendy Rose Williams.
This is Lori Reagan.
Well, hi, Lori. Sorry about that. I know that same area, same thing. So tell me what's going on, Lori Reagan.
Not a whole lot. I was joining my family today for some pumpkin patching.
Well, that sounds like fun. And we were just talking with Linda Beauvais, who's been on before, about her journey to writing an e-book. Could you weigh in on what your journey was to become a published author?
Well, I didn't set out to become a published author or an author at all. Basically, I just wanted to be creative. And so I went to a gal who taught creative development, it was kind of an intuitive development kind of course. And she kind of put me on the path of my art, and my art led into my books. So art came first, and then when I did some past life regressions, I would write down every regression that I had because I would remember them so vividly. And so then I took my regressions, and people kind of liked them. They liked the stories, and they thought I was a pretty good writer, so they were asking me, hey, can you put them in a book? So that's kind of how it all started with me.
I want to ask both of you this question. I'm going to go back to Linda Beauvais first. How has it changed your life, Linda?
Well, so far it hasn't changed that much because I'm still working my regular job and all that. But, on the side, I always work on my book. And at this point, well, I try to find ways how I can publicize it. I've been doing, like going for signings or readings. You read a little part of the book. And but I'm thinking of maybe trying to get a regular traditional publisher. So I'm working on that also. Mm-hmm.
I would like to take a moment to welcome Wendy Rose Williams to the show. Hello, Wendy.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Hi.
We have Linda Beauvais with us, and we have Lori Reagan with us. And I would also like to weigh in with the same 2 questions that I just asked them, Wendy. What was your journey to become a published author, and how has it changed your life?
Well, for me, I had a lot of blocks, a lot of energetic blocks to become an author. so it didn't start especially smoothly or with a very big specific plan. What happened was I edited a friend's book and helped him figure out to self-publish. And once he had that wonderful moment where he was physically holding his own book in his hands for the first time, he autographed a copy to me with thanks for getting him going, and just looked at me and said, "Your turn." And I was like, oh, that means I'm supposed to do this too. So that's how it started. And then Lori and I were told, we both heard from Spirit that we were going to be published together. And we didn't know how that was going to happen because I started writing novels and she was already well on her path, and she'd published a couple books of short stories at that time, but we didn't know how, but we said we were open to it. And then just wonderfully, we both ended up having stories selected by the Best of Spiritual Writers 2014, and we both were published together in there, and each had a short story in it. So that's how it started for me. And again, I wasn't planning it as a book, but I was having such wonderful sessions with past life regression, life between lives, and other things like that as I did my beginning spiritual work and energetic work, and I had to write those down. I was just really driven to write those down to try and understand what was going on and to process it. And I didn't have any intent of sharing it at first, but I ended up writing something like 1,200 pages over that first 2-year period because there was just so much going on.
And Wendy, I am holding in my hand your Regression Healing 1, The Huntsman, the Lord High Manor, and the World War II Soldier. And, of course, it was autographed, and thank you for sending it to me. I thoroughly have enjoyed it, and many of my friends have also read it and enjoyed it. And so we want to wish you continued success with it and all your other projects as well.
Well, wonderful. I so appreciate that. And you're quite right, Rich, because I then changed direction, and I just wasn't sure where to go with the fiction because it had gotten so big. And when you're new, if you don't have an editor or a publisher and don't know how to organize it, what came up really well was to start to do some client session books. So that's what Regression Healing 1 is a client session. So I went that direction instead with nonfiction, and I'll loop back around for the fiction.
I would like
soon.
to take a moment to return to Lori Reagan. How has it changed your life, Lori? And tell us about your books.
Actually, one thing publishing did for me was it put me out in the public more. I hadn't really fully stepped out into the public with my metaphysical stories or anything about metaphysical life until I had published my first book. It kind of put me in the spotlight as far as kind of breaking the ice and because there aren't a lot of books out there that are flat out metaphysically, based. I had to write a fiction because some of the stuff people just wouldn't believe happened to me. And my very first book was my actual regressions. Those are the stories that people read and said, oh, you ought to publish these in a book. And so in order for me to be able to do that, I had to separate myself from it and make it fiction, even though everything in that book actually happened to me. So I actually have 5 books out now, and all of them are actually free for download on ebook this weekend too, by the way, just to share with people. So
go ahead and tell us the names of them too while you're at it. Go ahead.
Okay, Stepping Through the Doorways of the Soul, Visions Awaken, and Lizzie, and The Edge of Hope. And my favorite book is More Than Meets the Eye, Tales of the Metaphysical. That one has some really cool stories about the paranormal. And so that's my favorite one right now.
Thank you, Lori. Thank you. And I want to go to Linda Beauvais for a moment. Tell us the name of your book, and also how did you choose where to publish your writing?
Well, my book is called The Gabriel Principle, and I chose to publish it with CreateSpace because then it could go out there right away. Of course, it's a long process to do it because there's different steps to getting it published, but with CreateSpace, they explain things so well, and you can't go to the next step unless you've finished one step, like the cover, the formatting, and all that. So I ended up doing all myself, and it didn't cost me anything. So I got my book on Amazon without it costing me anything. And then after that, you can order it one at a time or two at a time. They like an actual book, they'll send you, most of the time I order 5 at a time, so you don't have to invest a lot of money. And I thought for a beginner like me that was perfect for me. And not only that is that I'm dyslexic, so I do a lot of mistakes, and then I had different stages where I had it corrected, and I didn't have the cover corrected. I actually had a spelling mistake on the cover, and so I fixed it up, and then you could just put it back into CreateSpace, and it comes out right away with that mistake corrected. So I thought that was perfect for me, for someone who makes mistakes and stuff. I could re-download it, and then it was the new version. So that's why CreateSpace was perfect for me. Mm-hmm.
Wendy Rose Williams, how did you choose where to publish your writing?
I chose it for a couple of reasons. As Linda said, that print on demand and just the setup that's available through CreateSpace is really, really helpful because it just steps you through. And I just didn't feel it was realistic to be able to attract an agent, which is usually needed nowadays to be able to get to a publisher. And once I had it done, I just knew it was supposed to be shared, so it just made more sense to self-publish for a lot of reasons. And you've also got that beautiful control where you can make your own decisions. So as I did my research, Amazon's number one in market share, and CreateSpace had the templates, as Lori and Linda described, and friends have done well with that and just had that work. And print on demand, the fact that they will print one order at a time, it's important not only for your proofing to get a really quality product, but for your readers. They don't know what's going on in the back end, but essentially it's print on demand where just one copy will be physically printed and sent to them quickly.
Well, that sounds fantastic, Wendy. I'm going to ask you this first, but this is for everyone here. This question is directed to all three of you. What do you see as some of the pros and cons of self-publishing versus being published by a traditional publisher?
What I see as the big pro is if you are really being directed by your heart and your inner guidance with this writing, if it's just really centered in that direction, you've got control. And I'm sure there's many wonderful advantages of working with a big name publishing house, whether it's Hay House or whoever it might be, but you don't have control. You don't have control of your cover, your title, your pricing, what goes on that back jacket, and the content. I know Lori can share a story about that with content and a question around changing something that she had in it that was integral to the book. So for me, that was really, really the big piece was two things, was just being very, very practical. Self-publishing was an opportunity that was available to me, whereas a publisher wasn't. And that beautiful feeling of being able to follow my guides and my spiritual guidance with how I was to do it and what the content would be and how it would be presented.
Oh, absolutely. Lori, tell us the story that she has mentioned that she alluded to about the content. Tell us about that.
Oh, I think she's talking about when I published my first book, I went through BookBaby because that's where my editor had published before, and so I was new to all of this, and so she was helping me, and her suggestion was to go with Book Baby, so I did. My first book got published, everything was great. We move on to my second book, which is Lizzie, and Lizzie was a powerful, like, past life that I had actually sort of re-experienced by going to the actual place this lifetime happened. It kind of unlocked that lifetime so vividly for me that I had to write it, and it was it has some content in it that's not G-rated. And when I went to publish through Book Baby, they told me I had to change a portion, something of the story, in order for them to publish it. And I told them I can't do that because that would change my entire story, and that would just, it wouldn't make any sense. The whole story is based around that, and so because of that, that's why I went with Create Space. And as far as the pros and cons with, I agree with these ladies, it's easier to get your work out there when you go with, like, Amazon's Create Space. It's just, like Linda was saying, it's such an easy process. They lead you through it. The cons of going with an actual traditional publisher, Wendy and I had taken in a seminar where there were 10 published writers, and they were on a panel. And one of the gals, for instance, lost her rights to one of her books because she went with a traditional publisher. And she really wanted to get it back because she wanted to keep it was like her identity. It was her story. And, once it goes to a traditional publisher, you kind of lose any of that. You don't retain the rights. You don't retain the actual ability to change the story if you want to, or, keep it the way you want to write it. So anyway, when the publisher went out of business, she was able to actually get her books back, get her rights back, because the publisher went out of business. And all of those people on there pretty much were pro self-pub. So I thought that was interesting.
Thank you, Lori. Linda, tell us a little about yours. And something that Lori said reminded me, in the writing of your book, you also visited a physical location that was very important in a past life. Could you tell us a little about that also?
Well, yes, that's in my book, The Gabriel Principle, is that because I had access to, also, we're all into this past life stuff, and I found out that I had lived a life in Wichita, Kansas. So, maybe I think 20 years ago, I took a bus trip to Wichita to search for my past lives and all that. So I went to the library, and at that time it was microfiches, and I'd go on the different records to try and find the different names that I had found out. And nowadays you could just go on the computer and you get those same records on the internet. But at the time I had went to Wichita, and I actually found a few things that were quite interesting that corresponded with my past life. So it was sort of like an adventure that I wanted to prove that a reincarnation, actually exists. And to me, that was the way to do it. But I didn't find the ultimate proof, but I do feel that my life actually proved to me that reincarnation exists. So that's how I, in my book, how I see the connections between this life and the past lives and stuff like that. So it was, I enjoyed writing the book, and it was sort of like a therapy too. And I think a lot of people find it interesting. For the, the publishing, what I find with Create Space is, which is all good that we can put it on the internet, but after that, you got to learn how to market your book, and that's where I find it's difficult. That if you go with a publisher, maybe they have other ways to publicize your book and maybe more guidance. But it's true that you kind of lose, the ability of putting whatever you want in your book.